Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Nothing But Nugs podcast, part of the EPS family of podcasts by the fans, for the fans, diehards only. You already know the deal. Here we are back for yet another week of Denver Nuggets offseason coverage. Last week, we talked about the shooting guards. It was a very, very interesting episode. Obviously, the position group didn't perform quite the way we thought it would in some ways, and didn't perform the way we thought it would in some other ways that were much better. But now we get to talk about one of the most, if not the most, intriguing position group in all of 2025, 2026. That is the small forwards. So if you haven't checked out last week's episode, go ahead and do that. But you're here right now, and you're also not just here with me, you're here with Eric as well. What is going on, my friend?
Just looking forward to talking Nuggets, my favorite position group of the year from last year. So excited to dive into the conversation.
Yes, so am I. Now, before we get into the discussion today, there was an interesting thing that I saw online earlier this week. Since we're kind of pushing right up on like 4 weeks away from draft season, free agency season, there's an interesting trade that I saw out there on the internet. I'm struggling to find it now, but it involves trading away Aaron Gordon and Cam Johnson or Christian Brown, whatever it would be to make the money work, for Evan Mobley. Now, that's a very interesting trade. Now, obviously, Cam Johnson is one of the guys we'll talk about today, so I guess it's kind of tied to today's episode. But aside from that, I mean, that was kind of an intriguing deal that I wasn't necessarily too hesitant about. But before we get into our discussion today, I was kind of curious, Eric, what your thoughts would be on trading for a former defensive player of the year, a guy who's been on a playoff team the last few years and who's still pretty young, provides a different element to this Nuggets team. What do you think about that kind of deal for a guy like Evan Mobley?
I have to process that. I never want to just immediately jump in and say Aaron Gordon, tradable guy, because I really have felt like for the longest time that Aaron Gordon is essentially the heartbeat of this team. He has kind of been the glue that kept everything together from that championship run. But we also know he has struggled with injuries over the last 2 seasons. Evan Mobley is a guy who I've highlighted a couple of times just in my off season, as I look at people and things that could work with regards to salary. He's definitely a guy who I've looked at multiple times. Defensive player of the year, number one. That's primary for us because we need defense. There's no question about it. But also, if you watched him in that Cavs-Knicks series, I mean, he is a stretch. He can definitely shoot the ball at a fairly decent clip, and he can be a guy that comes in and he could come in and provide not only that rim protection that we've talked about that is missing so drastically on this team, but also somebody who could maybe fill into that role of what you saw Aaron Gordon doing over the last couple of seasons, where he's able to, instead of just bang down low, he's also able to step outside and knock down threes when needed. So that's a really interesting option. If it were me, I think. However, look, the money has to work, right? That's the key. If it were me and I was out there trying to find trades and trying to find things, to me, we talked about him last week. Christian Brown has just, unfortunately, I like him, but he probably has to be a guy you try to find a way to get out of that contract if you have any hopes of keeping like a Peyton Watson on the team or a Cam Johnson on the team. I don't see a future where those guys all are still on the team together and we go out and make moves. I don't think that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they actively noted that Christian Brown's name is on the trade block too. I think it was Tim Bontemps who noted that earlier this week. So they are genuinely looking to clear up space here. And even with a guy that they extended at the first few weeks of last season, they're just putting everything on the table, literally, like they said. But as far as the Evan Mobley idea, look, the dude shot 30% from three last year. So you're not bringing him in to be a shooter. Now, he's got incredible wingspan. He's 6'11", shot 55% from the field nonetheless. And a guy who averaged 2 blocks per game for a Nuggets team that needs rim protection just fundamentally. That's a very intriguing option. Now, Aaron Gordon shoots upwards of 40% from three. And so it's a massive downgrade from a shooting perspective. It's also a downgrade, technically speaking, from a chemistry perspective. Obviously, AJ's been here for upwards of like 5 years. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to make some stuff work. You can clear up some space in theory. If you can make the money work there, sending away a Cam Johnson or a Christian Brown and Aaron Gordon in that kind of a deal. I don't know Mobley's contract specifically. I think it's upwards of $40-50 million a year, though. So, I mean, maybe it just nets out. But for the player you're getting in return in that kind of a deal, I really don't have an issue with it. You know, I would not have an issue with the Nuggets adding in this type of way. Then you kind of have to think about what that starting lineup would look like, though. So you're not going to have, let's say they make the trade that was proposed, right? Cam Johnson and Aaron Gordon get sent away for Evan Mobley. What does that do to your starting rotation, right? Maybe that's Jamal, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Evan Mobley, Nikola Jokic. Is that a lineup you'd be okay with in theory?
I think in theory it is. I mean, look, it's different. There's no question about it. I think you're going to lose. It's going to be trade-offs with any type of scenario that you're trying to, you know, whether you're looking at moving Jamal for, you know, as I kind of brought up a few weeks ago, like a Kyrie Irving type of guy. You're going to give up a little bit with Jamal, but you're going to pick up in other places with Kyrie. The same kind of thing here with Evan Mobley. You're going to lose out on that 3-point shooting, but you're going to pick up so much in defense. You know, it would be interesting to see how that might even out. The other thing that I'm not a big fan of making other teams in the West better. And so, you know, anytime we're talking about trades, that's one of the first things I look at. Is I'm not trying to make another Western Conference team deeper and stronger, and sending Cam Johnson or Aaron Gordon to another Western Conference team, I think that not only pulls away from us potentially, but also helps another Western Conference team. And the Western Conference is already so deep. I mean, you're talking, you know, the difference between 1 through, I think, 10 this year in the playoffs, it really wasn't 1 and 2. I think OKC and San Antonio had those 2 spaces locked up. But between 3 and 10, the difference in games, I think it was only like 6 or 7 games. So you're not talking a huge difference there. So, you know, it's tough to make another team in the West better. And that's something that I kind of look at when I start to look at these types of trades.
Yeah, that's true. That's why going out in the East to the best of your ability would be a great way to improve your team without improving your immediate competition, right? Yep. Another interesting note about Mobley before we get into our discussion officially for this episode, 6 years younger than Aaron Gordon and historically healthier, right? In like 5 seasons, Mobley's lowest amount of games played has been 50. So, I mean, you get a guy who's pretty durable. You get a guy who's got tons of career left, not even technically in his prime. A lot to consider there. Yeah, not that the Nuggets are necessarily looking at making that trade, but that was a very interesting trade opportunity that I saw someone mention earlier this week. So nice. Glad we got those perspectives out on that. But now it's time to dive into the small forwards. All right. Eric has been dying to talk about the small forwards all week. This has been his favorite position group. You even mentioned it at the outset here, kind of. Let's start with Cam Johnson, man. Cam Johnson. All right, let's take a look at his regular season numbers. Obviously, a guy who's a veteran in this league at this point in time, 30 years old. Started on Phoenix way back in the day. And now in Denver in 2026, he shot 48% from the field, a career high, by the way, in shooting percentage. From the three-point line, also up there in terms of percentage, in terms of his career high, at least. That's his second best three-point shooting season by percentage at 43%, 84% from the free throw line. He gave you 4 rebounds a night, 2.4 assists, less than a turnover. almost a steal, about a half a block, and an overall plus minus of 6.4. Initial thoughts about Cam Johnson's season here, Eric, before we dive on into the nitty gritties.
Yeah, initial thoughts were it took a while for Cam Johnson to grow on me, to be quite honest with you. It was not it looked clunky when he first came, in those first couple of weeks. He wasn't hitting the open shot like we thought he was going to be able to do. He just seemed to it took him a little bit of time to find his footing. And I think that kind of the pressure started to build on him. You could see it in the way that he was playing. It's when you're on a team like the Brooklyn Nets where he came from, he had the ability to kind of play pretty loose. It didn't matter, he wasn't playing in a ton of big games. He wasn't shooting a ton of big shots. Well, when he came to the Nuggets, he was expected to kind of be that replacement for Michael Porter Jr. Now, we weren't expecting him to come in and, be at MPJ per se, but he was, we looked at him as somebody who was going to come in and replace Michael Porter Jr.'s ability to score, maybe not point for point, but somebody who was going to play a little bit better defense than maybe what MPJ played. Somebody that was going to be able to space the court a little bit better and maybe be able to create a little bit more than what MPJ did. And I think he really struggled with that at the outset of the season. But as that season went on, I think he grew much more comfortable. He kind of knew where he needed to be. He found his spots on the floor. And I think by the end of the year, he was certainly cranking.
Yeah, I mean, this is true. As far as him getting off to an absolutely atrocious start to his Nuggets tenure, I mean, his first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games, he made 3 threes in over 20 attempts. And then, I mean, he kind of started to figure it out a little bit more, a lot more double-digit games in there the next few weeks. But I mean, the pinnacle of his performances, right, it came in games that the Nuggets ultimately lost. So he shot 5 of 7 from 3 against Chicago in mid-November, but the Nuggets lost that game. He shot 4 of 7 from 3 against Sacramento in a game the Nuggets also lost. He shot 6 of 9 from 3 against San Antonio in a game the Nuggets lost. And so it was kind of like a situation where literally everything that could have been going wrong for Cam Johnson went wrong. He started off poorly, and then in the games that he started to do well, the team didn't do well. So strange start to his career. And then at the end of December, obviously he gets hurt, misses extended time, and just not a great situation overall. But I mean, towards the back end of the season, he started getting his groove a little bit more. That's really why his statistics ended up looking the way they did. You take a look here. In February, he had 18 at the Clippers, 15 at Portland, 17 later on against Houston. He had 5 straight games actually in March where he scored at least 15 points, and the Nuggets won 3 of those 5 games. So he really did start to pick it up over the course of the season. But as far as his play style, because, I mean, you mentioned Michael Porter Jr. He was not necessarily brought in to be a Michael Porter Jr. type player, although they had very comparable statistics, like namely their ability to shoot threes, a lot of them, and at a pretty high percentage. But he was brought in with a more defensive emphasis and really needed to maximize his opportunities on those catch and shoot shots. And if you look at his shot distribution, 54% from 3, or at least in terms of the percentage of shot type that he took, 54% of his shots were threes, 46% of his shots were twos, and most of those were catch and shoot. And so the strange thing about this is that at the same time, he also took the fewest threes he had ever taken per game with the Nuggets this season. And so as far as his play style, how do you feel like the Nuggets did at implementing Cam Johnson into their rotations?
Yeah, I think this is part of it that took some time, and then you had injuries that crept into play. Whether it was Christian Brown, obviously Cam got hurt, Jokic got hurt, so they almost kind of had to try to patch things where they could. But his play style, I think, once he really understood what his role was going to be on the team, I think his play style and his comfortability, his ability to be able to find where he was going to be able to make those open shots really started to come, I felt, a little bit more seamlessly. I mean, if you compare year to year stats, year over year stats with Cam, obviously I talked about he played in Brooklyn the year before. He averaged 18.8, so just under 19 points a game in 31 minutes. He dropped down to 12, just over 12 points per game, but his true shooting percentage went from 59% to 62%. So his efficiency was really pretty elite. I mean, his usage rate dropped from 23% down to 14% from a team perspective. So even though he had fewer opportunities, he was still making the best of those opportunities when he got them. Now, injuries are one of those things that you can't predict, and it sucks when it happens. But I do think that played a role into kind of him not finding his. I think he was starting to get there, and then, like you said, in December, he picked up that injury, and that kind of it was like one step forward, two steps back, and it took him a little bit of time to kind of get back onto the train, so to say. Before he was able to really start to feel comfortable again, and you could start to see it as we approach the playoffs. I think those were some of the games that you had highlighted where he started to score a bit more consistently. But for me, look, he was a guy who I don't think anybody thought he was going to come in and do exactly what Michael Porter Jr. did. I mean, we clearly lost a little bit from a rebounding perspective because he's not 6'10" like Michael Porter Jr. Even though I think he still averaged almost just under 4 rebounds per game. So it's not like we had some huge drop off where MPJ was averaging 10 rebounds a game or something. He still was kind of in that mix. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from him. I would have liked to have seen him be more consistent for a longer stretch than what we saw. And currently, we're really still talking about regular season. When it comes to the playoffs, if we're going to turn the page and talk playoffs, he didn't really improve. We didn't see some shift from him where he started to take on more, and his averages in the playoffs were 14 points a game, 3 rebounds a game. So he shot 50% from the field in the playoffs. He shot 31% from behind the arc in the playoffs. But ultimately, I think the Nuggets needed more from him in the playoffs. And that was part of the reason why, I think we struggled so much with, Jamal getting compressed on and not being able to run the 2-man game like we had hoped to. And then you combine that with the inability of our, whether it was a small forward or our other shooting guards, not really being able to knock down shots like we had hoped they would be able to. It really just all spelled doom when we made it to the playoffs. So look, Cam grew on me for sure. He's somebody who obviously his contract situation is kind of a bargaining chip for the Nuggets because it's done after this season. And so there's nothing else on the books so they can use that as leverage in the trade market if they so desire. But, if that's what they're going to do, if ultimately they're going to shop him, they do need to be cognizant of, hey, this is a guy who, at the end of the year, he did kind of start to put the pieces together. He was playing better, and that could, that could be something that he could potentially grow on for next season.
Yeah, this is true. Man, you mentioned Michael Porter Jr. again. If we were to run just the basic Michael Porter Jr., Cam Johnson comparison, looking back, obviously Michael Porter Jr. had a great year, right? He was the center point of a Brooklyn Nets team that was not very good at all. Okay. But 24 points per game, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. On paper, the numbers do look better. But if you dig a little bit deeper, what you'll notice is that Cam was actually both the better offensive rated and defensive rated player than Michael Porter Jr. in 2025, 2026. So Cam ended up fitting into the Nuggets offense nicely enough to the point where you weren't terribly upset that you lost Michael Porter Jr. Especially, the financial aspect comes into play again here too, right? Because it's not just that you got rid of Michael Porter Jr. because you didn't like something about his play style. his play style was great. Right? We liked Michael Porter Jr.'s play style, but with the other roster constrictions that we had and the areas that we needed to add depth, you just couldn't afford to pay a guy who's third or fourth option $38 million a year. And that would have, again, been an issue this offseason after the Nuggets extended Christian Brown. So they would have found themselves in a very similar situation going into this offseason. Maybe with a little bit more playoff success, one could argue, right? They lost in the second round last year. They lost in the first round this year. Might have been nice to have Michael Porter Jr.'s chemistry and overall just size, you might think, in a series like that. Mike would have gotten such great looks in the Minnesota series with how much they were hounding Jamal with Jaden McDaniels. Like, who's going to guard Mike at that point in time? I think he actually said that on a podcast at some point in the last few weeks too.
Yep.
So maybe that's where I heard that. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're in the situation you're in now. Cam Johnson filled in nicely enough for a Nuggets team that really did need to add depth elsewhere. If you don't get rid of Michael Porter Jr. last offseason, do you have enough room to bring in a guy like Jonas Valanciunas, like Tim Hardaway Jr., like Bruce Brown? Even though Big Val didn't end up playing very much in the postseason, during the regular season, he was very helpful on certain nights. And at a minimum, that was a need that the Nuggets had going into last season. So at the end of the day, that's just the way it ended up shaking out. And I'm not really too upset about that trade in retrospect. But I would like, I guess this kind of transitions into our kind of question before we move on to Peyton Watson. Do you want Cam Johnson on the roster next year? And do you think he met his expectations in 2025, 2026?
I think he met the expectations. I hesitate when I say I would like to have him back on the roster because I know his contract is such a bargaining chip. I think that that's something that, when it comes, whether there's a deal to be made in the offseason or as we approach, start to get closer to the trade deadline in season, I think Cam is going to be one of those guys who you hear his name talked about a lot, just because the Nuggets right now don't have a lot of poker chips to play with. And his chip is one of the bigger ones that they do have. One last thing to just talk about real quick with his stats. When you look at, he scored just under 18 points a game last year or 2 years ago with Brooklyn. And that was shooting almost 7.5 threes per game. He comes over to the Nuggets and he shoots just over 4.5 threes per game. So it almost cuts his total 3-point shots in half. And is still able to average, almost, 12.5 points per game. So I think with those additional shots, you may have seen him be able to put up closer to those Michael Porter Jr. type of numbers. I don't think he's going to average, at least he's not going to get enough shots in the Denver offense to average 25 points a night like Michael Porter Jr. is, because Mike's taking all those shots for Brooklyn. And like you said, they're not a very good team, so they're okay with him kind of shooting it as many times as he wants. Whereas with the Nuggets, it's a clearly defined offense that they run. It's not kind of loosey-goosey, and they're going to run most of it through Jamal and through Jokic, and he's going to be there to pick it up where he can. So again, for me, I'd like to have him back on the team. I would also like to see what deals might be out there for him that could be made.
Yeah. Fair enough points. I'm going to say myself, I think Cam Johnson slightly underachieved for me in 2025, 2026. Honestly, his performance on the court wasn't terrible at the end of the day. Okay, it wasn't very consistent, but I mean, he had in 2 games that the Nuggets needed to win in the first round series that they played, he played really well. So he showed up when they needed him to, which is exactly why we got him in the first place. Right? He was traded for in the offseason for the postseason. That was a postseason-minded acquisition. So, I mean, as far as that's concerned, that's fine. I didn't expect him to be as static I don't want to say poor, but that's what it felt like just watching it. I didn't expect him to be as static or as poor of a ball handler as he ended up being. Michael Porter Jr. had worked on his handle over the last few seasons and had gotten much better at it. every time Cam Johnson had the ball, I just never really felt very comfortable with him in really any situation, especially with traffic around. And so, I mean, it was a miracle that by the end of the season, he started to make a lot more of some of those contested layups after handling the ball, maybe say around a pick and roll. But I was very surprised at how uncomfortable I was with his ball handling in 2026. So I think he's slightly underachieved from that perspective. A lot of the highlights I had seen from him on Brooklyn involved him being a ball handler a lot. And so that was something that I just had zero expectation for him demonstrating in 2026, that he just couldn't handle the ball confidently. Do I want him on the team again in 2027? I would say I would not like to, if you can retain Peyton Watson. Now, my ideal situation here would actually be to get rid of both Cam and Christian Brown and then put P Watt at the 2, and then maybe go try to find a trade for a 3-and-D small forward. Because the free agent class for small forwards right now isn't looking terribly great. I mean, unless you want 35-year-old Chris Middleton as you're starting 3, doesn't look great. So you're gonna have to go make a trade. I'd be fine with that. I like Peyton Watson at the 2, honestly, a lot more than the 3, because I think he's a little undersized at the 3. At 6'7", even though he's got the wingspan. Nonetheless, I think I agree with you in that regard. I would say that he's got some pretty good tradability, let's say. I think I'd like the Nuggets to do what apparently people are saying that they're doing, which is looking to potentially ship him somewhere. He's one of the guys who's being actively shopped. So that's my perspective on Cam Johnson. Interesting guy. It's a tough season again, with all the injuries and him being a part of the guys who were injured for decent stretches of the season to really get a full confident evaluation. But based on the play that we saw, I mean, I'm pretty comfortable saying what I think about him being on this team again. That said, let's move into a guy who completely blew everybody's expectations away in 2026. Peyton Watson. Peyton Watson just had, if you had told me that Peyton Watson would have the season that he had last offseason, and that we would at some point during 2025, 2026 be legitimately questioning if Cam Johnson, the guy we just traded Michael Porter Jr. for, should actually be benched in favor of Peyton Watson, I probably would have thought that you're a little bit crazy. But I mean, goodness gracious, man, career highs literally across the board in everything. 15 points per game, 49% from the field, 41% from 3, 73% from the free throw line, 5 rebounds a game, 2 assists, about a steal and a block a game. Dude, tell us about Peyton Watson, man. Just how much did he surprise you with his pretty much all-around growth in 2025, 2026?
Yeah, this one is, I don't know if it's a notch for player development in the Nuggets staff, or if this is just a guy putting in the work. It's probably a combination of both. But Peyton Watson he's been one of my favorite players ever since he joined the Nuggets. Since they drafted him, it was kind of a head scratcher, right? They drafted a guy who literally averaged like no minutes at all at UCLA, didn't do a whole lot in college, and somebody in that room saw something in him. And then I think it was after his rookie season, or maybe during his rookie season, I don't know. I was watching something, and I saw some highlights, and it was an interview with Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant was talking about guys that nobody has heard of right now. Again, this is back during Peyton's rookie season. Guys that nobody has heard of, but in 5 years they might be a household name. And I remember he said Peyton Watson. He brought that name out, and I was like, "Huh, that's interesting." Side note, Peyton Watson and I share a birthday, so that was kind of another thing where I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I could definitely get down with this guy." And all of a sudden, you started to see some growth. You started to see him gain a little bit of confidence, especially towards the end of last season. But I don't think anybody expected the type of season that he came out and put up. I know he was limited to because of the hamstring injury at the end of the year. I think he only played in 54 games, but boy, those 54 games were sure a lot of fun to watch. And, I love what you said at the end of the Cam Johnson segment. I think that's the perfect role for Peyton Watson, is to move Peyton to the 2, because unlike Cam, Peyton does handle the ball quite a lot, and I feel like he does a pretty good job. He's able to, even at his height, he's able to bring the ball up the court. He's able to pass and find the open guys. But man, talk about a guy who, it just, when he came out of college, it didn't seem like he could throw the ball in the ocean from the 3-point line. And this season, it, after the first couple of games, we were like, okay, yeah, it's cool. He's going to shoot more threes. But then it was like, man, he's actually making a lot. And that corner 3 just became almost automatic when he shot that corner 3. When he had an open look in the corner, there were times where you could just pretty much count it. It was going in just about every time. So he's a lot of fun to watch. He brings a ton of energy too, which is, something that kind of gets lost along the way. You talk about team chemistry, you talk about energy type of guys. That's how the Nuggets won that championship. And I don't think they were the most talented team in the NBA that year, but they had the best chemistry. They tried harder. They put everything out on the line. And Peyton has shown that that's kind of his play style. Is he's going to be the guy that goes out there and gives 100% of effort, regardless of who they're playing, what the score is, or what that the opponent looks like. And those are the types of things, me as a fan of the NBA, those are the kinds of things that I like to see in players. And man, I can't say enough about Peyton Watson. He honestly is the reason why I say that this was my favorite group on the Nuggets this year. I know we'll talk about Spencer Jones, but the growth that we saw year over year with Peyton was, to me, it was really cool to see. I mean, he only averaged 5 more minutes per game. If you're looking at year over year stats, he went from 24 minutes to 29 minutes a game, but he jumped from 8 points per game to almost 15 points per game. Field goal shooting was 49%, 3-point shooting 41, almost 42%, up from 35%. So again, I don't know if that's, if you could just pin it all on player development for the Nuggets. I think they do have a good coaching staff, but you haven't seen a ton of great player development with the coaching staff and with this team. But Peyton Watson, he sure did develop, and I think it's more of a tip of the cap to him for being able to do so than necessarily saying the coaches are the ones. I know the coaches put in work too, but I think he was the one that put in the hard work.
Yeah. I mean, you could kind of feel that with some other guys on the team too, that this coaching staff is very offensive heavy, and it did really feel like everyone got better offensively this season. That's not even just a feeling. The statistics prove it. They had the best offense by rating in the league, and at points in time during the season, they had one of the best offenses in league history. So the offense was great, but Peyton Watson really did more than pretty much anyone besides Jamal in terms of just sheer improvement overall. I mean, yeah, you mentioned the statistics and the fact that he improved in literally every aspect across the board significantly. But I mean, his highs were also pretty high too. And this is another guy who kind of started off like Cam Johnson last season, didn't shoot the 3 very well at all. Made 2 threes in like his first, 8 games of the season last season. But I mean, he had 16 points against Indiana. He had 32 against the Pelicans in November, 15 against Sacramento, 27 against Memphis, 15 against Sacramento again, 15 against Dallas a few nights later, 21, 20. Some of these highs are really high. He had 20 points in 6 straight games in January when all those injuries started happening. And so that's really where he started to ascend. Then he had 19, 31, 18, 21, like 35 against Washington. I get that it's Washington, okay, one of the worst defensive teams in the league, but still, I mean, I don't think anyone would have guessed Peyton Watson would be dropping 35 on anybody at any point in time going into the season. So, I mean, this is a guy who really did put in the work, obviously on his own in the offseason, but also really benefited from a very offensive heavy staff that David Adelman put together here. going into the season. As far as his shot breakout, I mean, 66% of his shots were taken from 2-point range, and most of those were from less than 10 feet. So again, he really is playing sort of a unique role that neither Cam Johnson or Spencer Jones played, and that is being a 3, a 2 or a 3 on this team who really has a complete game. He lives mostly inside the 3-point line. He works off of his drives, his cuts, fade away, pull up, jump shots, but he can also knock down threes. And yeah, you mentioned threes from the corner. I mean, I think there was one point during the season when we were doing podcasts, when I was doing podcasts at least, where I was like, they just need to let Peyton Watson take more shots from 3 in the corner, and he'll knock them down. And then he did it one night. He had I think he made his first 3 or 4 threes from the corner. I forget what game that was, but I was like, yeah, exactly. There you go. That's Peyton Watson for whatever reason in 2026. So, I mean, it's good to see that the Nuggets have a guy like that on their team. Hopefully he stays on the team, and hopefully that remains the case. But it's good that the Nuggets found a guy who developed a full game while being a first-round pick of this team. You did mention that he did not really play very much at UCLA at all. He was definitely drafted as a project. They said that on draft night too. But, I mean, he's really just put it all together. I mean, Christian Braun got way more minutes than Peyton Watson did in their first 3 or 4 years of their careers. But, I mean, Christian Braun hasn't really fully developed his game. Right? He's still struggling to shoot consistently and be anything besides a cutter and a defender. As far as Zeke Nnaji is another first-round pick at the Nuggets the last few years who just has not panned out really at all. You're paying him $8 million a year to just sit on the bench and ride the pine. You can think of any other first-round picks in there. I think Julian Strawther was a back end of the first round.
Yep.
And yeah, so I'm another guy in there, right, who's kind of struggled to develop consistency. Although he's shown flashes, maybe he's a Peyton Watson kind of guy. But overall, I mean, there's not much else to say about Peyton Watson other than that he just completely surprised everybody and demonstrated potential we didn't know he had. As far as, do you want him on the team in 2027? And did he meet or exceed expectations? Wink, wink. I wonder what the answer to that question is. What are your thoughts as we wrap up Peyton Watson?
He definitely exceeded expectations. I think, I hope he is kind of a cornerstone on what they plan to build on. I think he is that kind of guy. You talked about, you kind of highlighted some of his games. That career high 35-point night against Washington, he was 10 for 16 that night, but 6 of 8 from 3. And oh, by the way, he had 4 blocks that game as well. Again, I know that's against Washington, like you said, not the greatest offensive or defensive team, but man, that's filling it up. And if you're kind of looking at guys who you want to try to build around, to me, that's a prime example of a guy who I would like to try and build around.
Yep, I'm going to echo that sentiment. It would be, well, first off, yeah, exceeded expectations is an understatement. So yeah, phenomenal job, Peyton Watson in 2026. Do I want him on the team again? Here's the thing, right? I want him on the team again. I want him to be their starting 2 guard in 2027. Obviously, the money makes it tough, but I think they should do whatever they can this offseason to create the opportunity, not just to re-sign him, but to make him the starting 2 guard of this team in 2027. But now here's where the interesting part comes in. He dealt with injuries towards the back end of the season. And the way that that'll impact him in 2027 is yet to be known, right? I mean, I think it's much more likely in my mind that Peyton Watson becomes the Peyton Watson, and if not a better version of the Peyton Watson than we saw in 2026, than it is that Christian Braun significantly becomes a better shooter and shot creator in 2026, 2027. But I mean, there's always just that element there that's in the back of your head. Like, he had a great out of the blue season, right? Can he keep that up post injury? Twice, right? He got injured, came back, got injured again. It'll be interesting to see how the offseason goes with his recovery. But for now, yeah, obviously I want him on the team again, and I would love to see him start at the 2 instead of the 3. But if you resign him to play the 3, it's not an issue for me either way. So yeah, that's Peyton Watson. Now we got to move into our final guy of the evening, final guy of the group, Spencer Jones. Spencer Jones kind of just, I think they signed him as an undrafted free agent in 2024, 2025 or something like that. This was a dude who was just there kind of as a two-way player, not really thought of as much of anything by anybody, except for maybe people who watched him just dominate at Stanford. Did not do much his first season. Got like 6 minutes a game in 2024, 2025. Then last year, he was forced into some significant playing time. And for a guy who is his size in his position, did really well, all things considered. Okay. Averaged about 22 minutes per game, 6 points, 50% from the field, 40% from three, 3 rebounds a game, about an assist a game, under a turnover, about a steal, half a block. What do you think of Spencer Jones and his performance in 2026?
I mean, he came in with essentially no expectations, right? I would say nobody really had him on the radar of guys who would be starting in the playoffs. So from that perspective, I think he kind of was a home run. You're right, dead on. He was an undrafted player. Played most of the season as a two-way player. Kind of hit that limit of how many games you can play as a two-way player, and the Nuggets had to do something. They either had to sign him to a contract or not be able to have him for the playoffs, which, I think at that point in time, you're dealing with Aaron Gordon not knowing where he's going to be. You had Peyton Watson with the hamstring injury. You had Christian Brown, trying to work his way back from an ankle, and, heaven forbid that anybody else got injured or dinged up. So I think the Nuggets kind of had reached a point where they had to make that decision, and I think it was a good decision. I think it was the right decision to go ahead and get him on a contract and have him kind of be part of that core. He was a guy who, as you mentioned 2 years ago, he played in 20 games. He started 0, averaged 6 minutes a game. He jumped this year to playing in 64 games. He started 37 games and averaged 22 minutes a game. Those are big jumps for anybody who goes from, kind of a rookie deal or, almost a nobody to somebody playing pretty consistent, pretty big time minutes for a team that was considered to be, for much of the season, a contender in the West and, possible championship contender. So I think he was somebody who, again, a lot of people probably didn't know about him. I'll raise my hand and say, look, the most I knew about Spencer Jones was he had an active LinkedIn account. I'm on LinkedIn pretty often, and I knew he was on there. So that was how I knew Spencer Jones. But then he started to have games where he was putting together, we always knew he kind of could play defense. Like that was kind of what they put him in for was, okay, well, he's probably not going to go out there and knock down a bunch of shots, but hopefully he can slow down, some of whether it's their 3 or their 4, sometimes he'd be put on the 4. But hopefully he could slow that person he was guarding down. But then all of a sudden he turns into a guy that can shoot the ball at a 50% clip. He can knock down threes at a 40% clip. And all of a sudden now you've got something. Now his 3-point shot, even though it goes in, does not look pretty. But that's okay. It doesn't have to look pretty as long as it goes in. But look, those are the kinds of guys that you sometimes during an NBA season, you've got to be able to find guys that can go in there and play minutes and get the job done. And I think ultimately that's what he was a guy that the coaching staff kind of figured out relatively quickly. I don't know why Adelman had such a soft spot for Spencer Jones coming into the season, but it seemed like he got the call quicker and more consistently than we've seen with guys in the past. Peyton Watson's a good example. He didn't really get a whole lot of minutes when Mike Malone was the coach, certainly not in year 1. In year 2, you kind of start to see a little bit. Zeke Naji is another type of player where they just don't get those consistent minutes. And coming into the season, I thought, well, if we run into injuries or if we have, struggles along the way, Zeke might be a person that the coaches turn to see what do we have, what can we do. And quite honestly, it seemed like they skipped over Zeke and went straight to Spencer Jones. I know they're not the same player. They don't play exactly the same game style, but I think that speaks to Spencer's ability to, practice the right way and play the right way and come in and be able to get the job done. And I think he did a phenomenal job at that throughout the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, this is true. This is very true. He was, again, just based on all the injuries and all the inconsistencies that they had with rotations, he was a guy who kind of demonstrated the most extreme game to game performance fluctuations. I mean, he had 28 against Dallas in December, 4 of 6 from 3, 11 of 15 from the field. And then the very next game, he plays 17 minutes and scores 1 point.
Yeah.
So, a lot of single digit outputs here from Spencer. But to be fair, they didn't really let him do very much consistently other than shoot threes. All right. 55% of the shots he took in 2026 were threes. And most of them were of the catch and shoot variety. So he was kind of, it's almost apparent that that's what the Nuggets were looking for out of their small forwards, guys who can just catch and shoot and play defense. And so Peyton Watson was kind of the odd guy out there in that he was a much better ball handler and just scored a lot more inside the paint and from mid range. But I mean, Spencer Jones kind of fit the mold, kind of similar to Cam Johnson. But Spencer Jones, man, no expectations, like you said, coming into the season, and really did demonstrate that he can be a solid 3-and-D player in this league, quite honestly. I mean, this is pretty much his rookie season. If you play 6 minutes per game and barely play in a season, that doesn't count. Okay. So he got consistent playing time for the first time in his career last season. And obviously he dealt with the issues that a lot of young players struggle with, fouls, inconsistency, finding your spot in the offense on any given evening. But he was able to produce ultimately consistently enough, either offensively or defensively, that it made him an asset. They converted him to a full-time contract, and he had 20 points in game 5 of the playoffs in a game that the Nuggets needed to win. And we're not getting very much else from anyone else in. So yeah, that was a fantastic season, all things considered, for Spencer Jones. We'll just move right on into it with Spencer. Do you think another pretty obvious answer, but do you think he exceeded expectations in 2026? And do you want him on the team again in 2027? He is a restricted free agent, I believe.
Yeah, restricted free agent. So it certainly exceeded the expectations. Like I said, I don't think anybody had any expectations for him. You're talking about a guy who, barely played. So the fact that he was getting playing time, to me, even if he wasn't going out there and putting up the 20 points per night or 20 points a game in the playoffs type of performances, I think it was still a win for him on the season, just being out there to see his minutes increase. As far as him being on the team, I think a lot of it depends on, what we're able to do, what other moves we're able to make. But I wouldn't mind having him on the team. He has certainly shown that he can fill a role that I think is a valuable role. The NBA is full of role players who do their jobs at a very high level. And I think sometimes you have to find those guys who are able to just fill a hole. You're able to do a couple of things at a very high, clip. And look, Spencer Jones, I think time will tell if he's able to do that, consistently year over year, or if he was kind of a flash in the pan. We'll see. But I don't think, just the way his game style is, or his game, the way his play style is, I don't think he was a flash in the pan. I feel like, being a 40% 3-point shooter isn't something that you just roll out of bed and are able to do. That takes work to do that. And if he's doing that with, limited play, I would imagine there's room for growth in there as well. So I think he's somebody who they can definitely keep as kind of a backup on the team, and hopefully we're able to fill other pieces. I do think that he fits well with the team chemistry. He seems like he's pretty well liked. He seems very coachable. So all of those things are positives for him, and kind of positives for the Nuggets. I don't think, sometimes you don't have to look very far for the things that you need the most. And Bruce Brown, when he left after that championship year, I think, look, I'm never going to fault a guy for wanting to go out and make money. I get it that your career is not, a forever window. You have a limited period of time to make as much money as you can. So I'll never fault him for that. But I do know that there were probably a lot of people in the Nuggets organization, as well as Nugget fans, who, felt like, man, we had the guy who we needed and we just let him get away. Well, I feel that way with Peyton Watson and with Spencer Jones. We have the guys we need. We just can't let them get away. And so that's kind of my 2 cents on Spencer Jones.
Yeah, that's a good 2 cents to have on Spencer Jones too. I think I would say obviously he exceeded expectations. He dropped 20 points in the playoff game, having not really played in his second season as a guy who mostly came off the bench and really only started because people were hurt. As a relatively undersized small forward too, I might add, at 6'7", 225 pounds. So yeah, he exceeded expectations. As far as him being on the team again in 2027, I think, look, as a Nuggets team that is kind of strapped for cash, that is trying to balance winning with staying within certain financial considerations, I think Spencer Jones is a guy you just have to knock out of the park and say, yeah, okay, we're bringing this guy back. He's not going to cost us too much. He has familiarity within the scheme, and he could easily be our backup 3. Easily. He can come out 10, 15 minutes, knock in some threes, play solid defense. Phenomenal all around. Okay. So I would love to see Spencer Jones back in 2027. I think, quite honestly, if you're the Nuggets and you're thinking bench construction, obviously they need to go find a veteran point guard to come off their bench in 2027. But we mentioned Julian Strawther on last week's episode. I think Julian has to step in as the new Tim Hardaway Jr. in some sense in 2027. I think Spencer Jones needs to be something similar at the 3. Bruce Brown kind of hovered somewhere between 1 through 3 through most of last season off the bench, along with Peyton Watson, I guess, right? But Spencer Jones, I think, fits a solid backup 3 mold for a team that needs athletic guys who can fit in the system, especially guys who have demonstrated that they can succeed in the system already when given an opportunity. And so I think Spencer has a very, and I won't say he has like an all-star type of ceiling, but I think he has that 3-and-D type of ceiling that the Nuggets need, and at a very relatively affordable price tag, I might add. So I like Spencer Jones being locked in as the backup 3 on this team in 2027. Hopefully they can get that done. And retool some stuff in the starting lineup. So yeah, I'm kind of excited about Spencer Jones. We'll see what 2027 holds for him. But as far as the group overall, all 3 of these guys, what are your final takeaways about the Nuggets small forwards in 2025, 2026?
Yeah, final takeaways. Look, I do think that overall as a group, even though Cam maybe didn't, to me, Cam basically just kind of met the expectations. I think what Peyton Watson and Spencer Jones were able to do is kind of push that exceeded expectation level so high that it makes up for what Cam wasn't able to do. But that being said, we all know what happened in the playoffs. We all know that Peyton Watson not being there was kind of almost having to play the T-Wolves with one hand tied behind your back. You're missing one of, if not your best defensive players, certainly somebody who could guard out on the perimeter, somebody with a super long wingspan who can maybe be a little bit of a rim protector against some of those guys, and maybe play a little bit more matchup against the length of Minnesota. So I would have really liked to have seen how that would have played out. But ultimately, I think it's a met expectations with Cam in there, but I think overall it's probably an exceeded expectations just from what those two guys were able to do, because really they kind of burst on the scenes out of nowhere. Certainly Spencer Jones did, but I don't think Peyton had much. Certainly didn't have the expectations of what he did. So I think that bar is set pretty high for next year, though. So it'll be interesting to see what they do next year, when we're having this same conversation after the season next year.
Yeah, for sure. It was a very interesting position group. Cam Johnson, I mean, he played just well enough to the point where you're like, okay, I'm fine with how he played in 2026. Peyton Watson, yeah, absolutely phenomenal. Just fantastic. Again, unfortunately, he couldn't play that playoff series, but it gives you some hope that you have guys in-house who can actually contribute, right? That's really what he proved in a series of first-round picks. There's one who actually is developing into a complete player who could potentially be a leader of this franchise at some point in the next 5 to 7 years as Nikola and Jamal enter their early, mid, and late 30s. So Peyton Watson absolutely showed out. And then Spencer Jones did something similar in the role and opportunity that he was given to perform it. Absolutely tenacious on defense. And I think that's really the highlight there, too, is that each of these three guys, for what they may have not done offensively or not been available to do, let's say, for injury reasons, they all played really solid defense. And for a Nuggets team that ended up being mid to sort of bottom half of the league in defensive rating, that was really, really valuable. It was just nice to know that you had at least one position group that was healthy enough, generally speaking, and good enough defensively, consistently enough on guys pretty much 2 through 4 to the point where you're like, yeah, they'll go out there and they'll hold it down because we know that the guards struggled defensively. We know that Nikola is not the greatest at rim protection, although he's good at other things defensively. And so it was just nice to have athletic, tenacious guys on defense who actually went out and got it done too. So that's another thing to shout out this position group for and their performance in 2026. Any other closing thoughts as we wrap up the episode?
Nope. I think we really touched on all the hot points. I mean, look, if we can put together a healthy season where we see Peyton Watson play a full season like he played this year, I think we're looking at a guy who could put up those Michael Porter Jr.-esque numbers. And I think that was really something that the Nuggets missed. I know Cam added a little bit, but especially when it got kind of crunch time and Aaron Gordon wasn't there, they needed a third outlet, and nobody really stepped up to do it. So that's what I'm really looking forward to with Peyton Watson. Hopefully they're able to re-sign him. They're able to figure out the money, because I think he's an integral part as we move into the future.
Completely agree. 100%. So we'll see what happens. Obviously money is money, but got to make it happen. Got to make it happen with guys like that. So that was a fantastic discussion about easily the most intriguing position group in 2026. Thank you to everyone who listened to this episode. If you are new, thank you for checking out our content. You should go check out our previous episodes. And if you've been listening for a while, we appreciate that as well. You're kind of getting our full picture of this team and kind of what we think about the team in past, in present, and in future. So if you have any comments, let us know. You can drop those in the comment section at any point during our streams or afterwards in the comment section of the video itself. But thank you for listening to this episode. If you've made it this far, until next week, have a fantastic week, and we'll see you then. So then, take care and peace out.